So thanks so much for making some time available today. Just to kick off our conversation, can I ask, how did you find out about the Designing for Health community?
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Right.
I actually went along to one of the RMIT Health Innovation Hub
Oh,
events online, which was a real battle from the technical side because I think it was the first one they were running online. But I really enjoyed it and followed up their website, and they had a link to the Slack channel there,
yeah.
and so that's how I got involved.
Cool. Oh, that's excellent. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Just what's your connection to the world of healthcare?
Yeah, so a few connections, but the main one is that I'm a practicing psychiatrist and I work over at the Austin Health clinically in the psychological trauma recovery service,
Okay.
which is a real mouthful. But yeah, we mostly work with kind of veterans and first responders with psychological trauma. Um, and I did some of my psychiatry, a lot of my psychiatry and medical training there as well. And then I dabbled a little bit in private practice, and more recently I've taken on a role at an organisation called Phoenix Australia, which is associated with Melbourne Uni. It's an odd little organisation. They do a mix of kind of clinical trials to sort of, it's kind of a bit like the research institute cross with a think tank, cross with a sort of education training provider, cross with a little bit of consulting. So it should be a fun little role. And I'll be focusing a bit on sort of medical governance and innovation there. So yeah, that's.
And so what's your like connection to design? What does design mean to you?
Well, I guess I've always kind of seen myself as pretty multidisciplinary, and I think one of the limits in or one of the problems in healthcare, I think, is that it is a very conservative industry that tends to do things its own way, and there's also a tendency, I think, to like see something good that sits outside healthcare, absorb it in some sort of somewhat half-assed way at times within medicine, and then try and have our own internal experts into things. And I think design stuff, I think, is classic for that. The whole notion of sort of patient-centered care is basically just customer-centered design, or human-centered design, really, isn't it? But just repackaged and done by health people, generally not quite as well as kind of the people doing this stuff in a
I couldn't
non-monopoly
possibly
setting.
comment, Rahul. I'll let you stand with that evaluation. Yeah, okay. So what about you personally though? So this is your like, you've made this assessment, you've made this observation. How does it
Yeah.
relate to you personally?
So I guess the way I've always seen part of my role as being trying to bridge, other things that I'm interested in, as well as kind of normal or standard healthcare approaches. So I like to try and pick up what I can from, other disciplines outside traditional kind of health professions, and try and learn enough of the kind of lingo and the principles to both apply it a little bit for myself, but also to be able to, I guess, show the value of some of that thinking, and suggesting gently that we do more of that and more involvement with people who specialize in the area, including design but other types of folk as well.
So would you be comfortable sort of maybe describing an example about where you've had the opportunity, like what you saw, what you thought might help, and if you had an opportunity to bring that into the project or the problem area,
Yeah.
and how that went?
Yeah, so I'm working on one project at the moment, where we're looking at, I probably can't got the full details here, but it's basically a program for a very specific group of folk within the sort of defense community, and we are trying to develop like a short stay program for that group. and it's to tackle one of the problems to serving this group has been a kind of mismatch between sort of our processes rather than necessarily the expertise. So we've got the expertise there. There's a need, but often it's because we're kind of slow in throughput and responsiveness and a few other bits and pieces. It means that the referring organization often can't get to our services in the time they need them. So we've been looking at sort of different models that we could use, and really the short stay thing really came out of the fact that there's a few sort of similar units in the space, not for the cohort that we had in mind, but to solve a kind of similar problem. And because it was kind of already there, that was kind of what had attracted us initially. And I'd been dabbling a little bit last year in the sort of pre-accelerator world. I did the open talent pathway, which is a kind of a joint thing from the Melbourne Innovation District for graduate research students with some entrepreneurial kind of potential. And that was really my personal introduction to design thinking and some of those processes.
Right.
And so when I had the opportunity to do the service development stuff, I kind of asked really to have a bit of flexibility to get a bit more customer centric and throw away more of our assumptions when I went into this. And I've really been able to collaborate much more directly with the referring practitioners, the organization, and trying to like really kind of, I guess, go close and really understand both our patients' needs, but also the people that refer to us, and also the people that pay the people that refer to us, and really thinking about that whole pipeline, rather than kind of the more assumption based, this is how we've done it, this is what the evidence says.
So it sounds like you've been able to do some of that direct user research where you can go in and observe or speak to people who are actually involved in this, the service system as it's gonna.
And I think it's been an unusual process for them as well, but it's been, I think, really helpful as well, because I think this is the first time that they've had people approach them and want to co-develop something tailored for them. They're usually just calling up people who might closely fit. So even things like finding out that to refer a person to it's generally one person spends about half a day calling different units and doing all this sort of stuff. So just being able to quickly understand what are the bits where we can add value pretty easily. It's been really useful. And the other thing is that because we're targeting a group that we don't normally see, making assumptions based on the cohorts that we do is likely to get us into a bit of trouble as well. So I think
keep going.
Go on.
No, keep going.
No. So I guess just the approach has been quite helpful to get much more customer centric and then design the service around those needs.
So you've been conducting this research and you have those learnings in your head, and I'm assuming you've got some way that you've collected the data and stored it. Have you been able to share those learnings with other project members? Like, how have you sort of communicated what you've observed and your finding and the empathy that you've built? Is that mainly located in you, or have you been able to sort of spread it across the project a bit to other project members?
So I've spread a fair bit, I think. So we obviously the two folk who are the sort of the managers of the unit, I update on a regular basis around kind of how I've been progressing, and I've been keeping them in the loop about the approach I've taken. But the other thing is essentially what I ended up doing was mapping, based on some of those interviews, like very clear written needs from the different groups, and kind of one around organizational needs and the others around patients, and then got their kind of sign on with, yep, you've captured it, and then I've just been working with a lot of the people that actually deliver services, so lots of clinicians and other folk and admin staff, etc., saying, look, based on all of this, these are the needs. How can we, come together and map out specific interventions and ideas about how we can meet those needs much more concretely than we, or intentionally than we might otherwise do, and really kind of do a bit more idea generation and stuff very specifically around these. So I think that's been quite a fun exercise. I've tended to do it more in sort of lots of one-on-ones rather than as a group. So that's probably something that, now that I'm talking to you, I'm thinking it'd be good to do a bit more of.
Why do you think it might be good to do it in a group?
Well, I think both are valuable, right? Like you can get a bit of groupthink if you have a room full of people, and then you just end up again with the noisy people taking over the agenda sometimes. But equally, I think once you get it to a certain point, people having more opportunity to kind of chip in and bring their different perspectives and stuff can also add value. So I think that's something that would probably enhance the process.
Yeah, you're right. There's pros and cons for one-on-one and group. I like to do group work when so that people can hear each other's assumptions, because we might be using the same language or the same terminology for something, but the picture that we have in our head when we use that word they're not identical across different people's brains. So when you start to see, people talk about something like, a particular patient need, but they actually have slightly different assumptions around how they perceive it. So I do like at some stage bringing a group together so that you can elicit those assumptions and they can have some light shed on them, and the group can sort of see each other's assumptions and go, oh, okay. And that can be a really helpful conversation around calibrating, like, oh, what do we actually mean? What do we actually agree? What do we actually mean?
I mean, look, this is a bit of a digression, but I know that there's some really interesting research around how different people's perception of or understandings of words like probably and likely and all those sort of things are. It can range from really like 10% to 80%. Between different people. So
that's so true. Okay. So I have so there's a bunch of different questions I have that I could ask people in these sessions. Something that I think might be interesting is what do you feel like you need to support you in your design practice at the moment? You've done this user research and you've had a really good, you've gotten the participants to validate your inferences, and it sounds like you're communicating those findings and they're being well received, and it's seeding a lot of creativity. Do you feel like there's something that you need or something that you're not, like if you were to have you could have a designer for free for a week, what would you ask them to do, or what would you ask them to help you with?
Ooh, that's a good question. I get them to do?
Or even for you personally. Like even if it was for you personally, or whether it's the project or you personally, just what?
Well, I mean, I think one thing that probably I'd love to understand a bit more is the full cycle of kind of evaluating and refining stuff, because I think the project more generally, because I think often a lot of the juicy stuff and also the organizational investment tends to be at the very start of a thing, and the constant refinement and like the feedback and building in those processes of how we monitor the design and when once people are actually going through, that would be pretty useful, and something that I kind of need to get a better handle on too. And Yeah, and I guess just in general, I think it's yeah, I think it's just that final implementation step. I think that, although I'm reasonably confident that this will, go through and it'll all be, I think it'll definitely be better than status quo.
Yeah.
It's where, yeah, there's always, I don't know, attention. It's not something that, I've done personally before. And although others have, like, change in healthcare and new service models and stuff happen so infrequently that,
Mm.
it tends to not, people only do it a couple of times per career, I think, unless you're, you know, in one of very few roles
Yeah.
in the system.
Yeah. 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 That's interesting. Yeah. Um, yes. It's all about when the rubber hits the road, really, isn't it? It's easy to
Yeah.
sketch and think of ideas and yeah, but it's how do we know, like how do we actually implement and how do we know that it's working? Yeah, they're really valid
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I think is a challenge is the just doing the full like change management and training of different levels of staff to do different parts of the process.
Mm.
Um, without like dedicated sort of team of people doing the training and
Mm.
stuff. Because again, within my organization, I'm probably one of the few slash only people that kind of are doing it this way. There's not that much like internal help to do that, and
Mm.
also, everything's on a somewhat of a shoestring
Yeah.
budget as well. So hiring someone to do that specifically also is tricky.
Mm.
Um, with unless it's something that's kind of being driven, by a funder or directly.
Yeah.
We've kind of self-instigated. So even though there's the group that we're working with, I kind of will potentially chip in some money. That's
Yeah.
kind of going to be a bit down the track. So it's kind of backwards a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I certainly have never had any training in change management. Now that I think about it, like we really ought to just assume that that's a default part of any health design project, because basically
hmm,
anything that we're working on is sort of has an enterprise implication, doesn't it? Like it's always going to affect internal processes and
yeah.
people. And yeah, I would definitely benefit from an understanding about, change management theories and
Hmm,
frameworks and how you do it. And yeah, I wonder if we have any people in the community who know about that stuff. I'll ask the question. But yeah,
yeah.
true. That's like
It,
a part of the puzzle
yeah.
that has sort of been missing, I think. Yeah.
It's also something just as simple as not obviously stepping on toes. I
Yeah.
remember there was a couple of years ago, I got a few clinicians trained up and with access to upload documents directly to our sort of scanned medical record. And really, it was for a very niche kind of use case. Every now and then, you'll see someone on a Friday. You're quite worried about that person. You want some record of, whatever you guys decided on the system on the Friday before you go home, not sitting in a tray waiting to be scanned.
Yeah.
Um, and we had some admin staff who were genuinely concerned that we were going to get clinicians to do their job, which is obviously the last thing that
Yeah. Yeah.
any of them want to be doing. But
Yeah.
it was just about communicating that and making and even being aware that someone might be stressed out.
Yeah, that's true. I can think of quite a few situations in organizations where someone at the, sort of higher, sort of at a level where they can make decisions and say, this is what we're going to do, has assumed that it's good news. And they've not thought about all the different sort of consequences that and scenarios that are running
Mm,
through people's minds, and it actually sows anxiety. It's like,
yeah,
hey, you thought you were like making everybody feel good, but actually you're not. So yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah. Even that, just the simple thing about how do you make an announcement? Yeah, maybe we can improve our processes for just how we communicate. Yeah. Right. So I guess we've sort of covered a few things about your design journey and your design practice and the area that you're working in. You've also, like, I happen to know that you've learned a bit of coding and dev work too, haven't you?
Yeah,
Tell us about that.
sure. God, so I've always been interested in sort of technology stuff, kind of more generally, but taking the I suppose some of my journey has come from dissatisfaction with how much we're able to achieve in mental health care in general. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of good stuff we do, but there's also a lot of people who don't benefit from the things that we have on offer. And one of the areas that's been making a lot of stride lately is machine learning and AI, and range of technology-driven things, which I found more interesting than some of the other directions that the field has gone in, and also somewhere where I suppose from a strategic point of view for my own personal career, where there was less competition as well
Yeah.
in that. And so I thought I'd like to learn a bit more about that whole world. And I explored a few ways of kind of trying to break in and understand that more. And I ended up settling in on doing a PhD actually,
Oh,
trying to, so the project is to look at training software to diagnose PTSD.
wow.
And it leverages, yeah. So it's been interesting. It's been slow going, partly thanks to COVID, but
Yeah.
also partly because I find a lot of bright and shinies to pursue along the way as well.
Yeah.
But it leverages some work done by one of my supervisors, who, I guess, speaking of interdisciplinary, he's Sigfrido Fuentes, associate professor. Sigfrido Fuentes is a professor of digital agriculture. So he does a lot of computational psychophysiology, so using cameras and stuff to derive physiological states, and applies it to kind of neuromarketing, but also to like cattle and how stretched out cattle are, and lots of other cool bits and bobs.
Yeah.
He has an electronic nose that comes up with those wanky adjectives for wine. A whole bunch of stuff.
An electronic nose. That is amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the two of us were the last two standing at a networking event, and we got to talking about his tech. And at the time, I had been, interviewing and having a chat with lots of people about the idea of doing a PhD, and I thought, hey, we could probably reuse our tech in the space that I'm in.
Yeah.
And that is kind of how that was born. And so, like, some of his stuff is already kind of pre-coded and stuff, but I wanted to kind of understand a little bit of it. So that's kind of what started my journey. He mostly works on MATLAB, so I did a bit of work from there. I'd heard prior to meeting him, I'd heard that a lot of the sort of machine learning stuff happens on Python, so I'd started doing a bit of a Coursera course on that. And yeah, just and mix of that and YouTube. And so the web page that I used to enroll participants and present some of my and lead to presenting some of the cognitive tests and stuff that I get my participants to do, actually is a modified version of a YouTube tutorial on how to make a pizza ordering website. So I just replaced pizza with a few other things, and it's,
So cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's been fun. I mean, coding's been because once kind of the basics. I mean, I'd definitely not consider myself replacing a software engineer anytime soon. But
Yeah.
once the basics, there's so many kind of open source tools out there that with just a little bit of basic knowledge, you can kind of do some impressive things. So that's been quite fun. And it's also in normal role, you don't really get that much chance to kind of make stuff, right? So it's kind of
Yeah. Oh,
fun to do
absolutely. Yeah.
something that's very
Yeah.
discreet that,
Yeah. Wow.
but yeah, I
That
mean,
sounds amazing. Definitely, yeah, be interested to hear more about that. Um, I'm, my neurons are firing thinking about that electronic nose. You could have a dating site that like profiles people's pheromones and matches people based on their pheromone
it's a
profile.
great idea. I'll have to email him.
Should have said that out loud. Now someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You can edit this bit out.
Wow. Okay. That's really fun. Yeah. So, okay. Do you have any questions? Is there anything you'd like to ask me, or any sort of questions you'd like to put out to the community or say to the community?
No, I just keep the introductions coming. I think that slowed down a little bit.
I know.
So it's always good to know
Yeah.
who's there. I've connected with a lot of interesting people from just their introductions.
Oh, cool. So
The
you've used the community to sort of do some networking. Is that
yeah, I have.
excellent?
So yeah, I mean, not heaps, but I've probably had a couple of Zoom chats with a few people
Yeah.
from the community. The other thing I really thank you for actually is, I think it was you that posted it up, was the Irrational Labs behavior design course.
Oh, I
I
can't.
did.
Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're running like a behavior design for health boot camp. And the content isn't amazing, but I mean, it's kind of neat, like
Yeah.
as in terms of a kind of framework. But what has been really cool is that they've got a Slack channel for their learners, and it's such a diverse group that it's been fascinating. I've met heaps of really interesting people on there, everywhere from Scotland to some Melburnians to New York and South
Wow.
America,
Yeah.
everywhere, India, working on some interesting stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um, it's been
That's
a real
so
asset.
cool, because we don't like, yeah, we do get some Slack reports, some analytics, but to be honest, it looks like rubbish, because it makes it says, I haven't got it in front of me, but it basically will say like, there have been hundreds of messages posted in the last 3 months, and you sort of like, you look and you go, okay, so do they mean DMs? Do they mean like there's
Mhm.
like, hundreds of
Yeah,
people talking to each other? Like, I'm finding that hard to believe. So it's good to know that there is actually some activity happening in the background that is not like in the public space of the
yeah,
community, but people are talking to each other. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, we've definitely seen a slowdown in members joining over COVID, definitely. And there's been a slowdown in conversations and people sharing stuff that's picking up a little bit now. But we actually, like, our management team got really hit by COVID and hit by like personal health issues, and so it's just Renee and myself at the moment. So yeah, if anyone's watching this and you think you've got some bandwidth, I think it's such a demanding field that, like, I started this community when I was a postgraduate student, so when you're a postgraduate student, time, you do have the luxury of time compared to
yeah,
people who are like full-time employed. So yeah, I'm if anybody thinks that they might have the bandwidth, that's important, because people can be interested, but if they've got demanding jobs, the reality is they don't have time to keep an eye on the community every day. So yeah, but it's great to hear that there's been some organic stuff happening. That's
yeah, yeah.
very
I mean,
reassuring.
it's a great thing for junior folk breaking into a field, though. You can't beat the networking of being active in
Yeah,
these things and
yeah.
being
And
the first friendly name that people
that's
see.
right. Yeah. And like, we in the field has so many subject matter experts across so many fields, but we're all a novice at something at some stage.
Yeah.
So, you know, whether it's people with a clinical background trying to learn about design, or you know, very senior designers trying to get traction in their first couple of healthcare projects. Yeah, we all end up finding that we're at the edge of our expertise in some direction. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Rahul. I'm just going to stop
No problem.
recording.